Spirit, we gather to praise and worship you. We eagerly seek your presence. We bless you for all that you have done and continue to do for us. Your blessings to us is evidence of your great and awesome love, because we recognize that we do not deserve you love us. Thank you, God, for forgiving us for our sins. Keep us on the right path. Remind us when we need to confess and seek your continued forgiveness. Father, as we come together to worship and praise you today, we are thinking about those that we know in our families, our friends, our coworkers, that we'd like to live for you. Father, as their names and faces flash through our minds, we pray for the sick. We pray for your healing touch. Thank you for the healing that you're doing on all of us that are sitting here today. Father, we pray for those who we think about who have fears. We pray that your Holy Spirit would be with them and cause them to be comforted and understanding of what they are going through. Father, we pray for those who are in the mourning, those who have suffered loss. Send them friends and comfort. For those who are lonely, Father, we just ask that you use us as you will in answering these prayers. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for our pastor and his family. We pray that you will continue to bless them and keep them. We dedicate this time to you now, Father. We ask that you put words in our pastor's mouth that we would hear, that we would open our ears up here, that our hearts would be touched by you and come from this place and change the world. Thank you for praise you. In Jesus' name. Okay, it's now time that we dismiss our children for Children's Church. If you go in next door. Hey. Nice to just a little review for those who have not been with us. We're in the book of Nehemiah, and we're in chapter 5. So let me just quickly bring you up to date where we are in the narrative. First of all, Nehemiah miraculously meets the king of Persia, and the king miraculously gives him the money and the people that he needs to go back and rebuild the wall in Jerusalem. And so the basic place where we start is this is God's plan. Now, even though it's God's plan, some troubles occurred, which we've talked about a little bit, because Nehemiah's presence in Judea and in Jerusalem was not appreciated by any of the people who lived around there. probably because they remembered when the Jews were, the number one kingdom in the world, and now they're back and starting to rebuild. So they came against it, and they actually threatened to kill Nehemiah and the people. And so they armed themselves, they formed a militia, they continued to build, and even though the fear of being murdered was there. So we're about to learn an equally troublesome problem, which is not mentioned until this point. Trouble in the church, trouble among the people of God. Because when you're fighting against trouble from outside, you're drawn together to do that. But when there's fighting inside, then that becomes a real problem, really a more significant problem than to have a common enemy. So it says, there was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish kin. Now, it's really a couple interesting things about this is that when you read the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, right up until this point, they're known as the children of Israel. And at this point, they begin to be known as Jewish people because the children of Israel were scattered, and they came back to the land of Judea, and they're ready to rebuild. And so it's interesting to just make that side note that here we find in this book and in the book of Ezra, which is a contemporary book to this, the name Jewish people is found. And immediately it says there's an outcry of the people and their wives. And it's interesting that it mentions their wives because in the scriptures, for the most part, it's very male dominated. And so I suspect that probably the wives probably were quite loud in this, and you'll see why they were, and they had every right to be. So there's a problem going on. Have you ever been involved in church problems? Yeah, everybody that's been in church very long has had to deal with church problems. So there was a great outcry. There's three things that are said here, and then a fourth where they speak in unity. There were those who said, with our sons and our daughters, we are many, we must get grain so that we may eat and stay alive. Now, why did they need food?
Everything was desolate there.
Well, they had farms and stuff, we'll see, but weren't they all leaving their farms and working on the wall in Jerusalem?
That's what I mean, there wasn't any food in Jerusalem. Everything was desolate.
So there's people they're starting to go hungry. There's some people that they don't have enough food. And we'll look progressively. These are the people in the best condition. There's three other conditions mentioned and then some other things here which are causing them a problem. And one of the main reasons for the problem is because everybody is together working on the wall and they're not working their farms. And so they start to say, we need food. They start to complain. I don't know if you can see this. I read this last week. I'm a graduate of Bloomfield Central School. And here is a menu from the school, 1940. I think this was in February, 1940, and there's only 4 days mentioned, so I assume that it was either in Lincoln's birthday week or President's Week. They used to switch those off, and now we just have President's Day. Look at what they got for food at Bloomfield. Tuesday, stewed tomatoes. Wednesday, creamed cabbage. Thursday, noodle and pea soup. Friday, creamed asparagus on toast. Sign me up. I just put this up so that you can understand that we are living in plenty. This was post Depression era. This was when things were getting back on track, but this is what kids ate in school. There was no school breakfast in those days. But here we have something even worse. There's no food whatsoever. These people would have been glad to have the creamed asparagus on toast. because there literally was no food. Like my daughter-in-law, Chingte from India, she said, when Americans say there's no food in the house, they mean there's nothing they want to eat. And when Indians say there's no food in the house, they mean there's no food in the house. So the first complaint is no food. But that's a symptom of the problem. There were those also who said, we're having to pledge our field and our vineyards and our houses in order to get grain during the famine. So this is even worse because they have put up their property for a temporary meal. Their house is pledged. If they don't pay back what they borrowed for the food, that the creditor can take their house or their field or whatever. And so these people are in even more dire straits than the first ones. At least the first ones haven't pledged their property. And when it says the famine, I looked up the word, and famine, at least in my mind, famine is an event that causes people to be hungry. But the Hebrew word is simply to be hungry. It doesn't indicate why, whether it's because of war, or whether it's become pestilence or anything like that. It's just when it says famine, it just means everybody is hungry. Can you imagine trying to build the wall of Jerusalem under such conditions? But it's even worse than that. We don't have any inkling of this in the first part of the story whatsoever. It's all, the whole book is like that. It's like, whoa. Look at the things that they overcame to get the plan of God done. So they're in financial bondage. They've borrowed money and they've put up their property. There's two kinds of mortgages. There's first mortgages, and those are what we call non-recourse mortgages. A non-recourse mortgage is a regular mortgage in this state. If you go and you get a first mortgage, it's non-recourse. That means if you don't pay it, the only thing that they can do is take your property. If you get one of those home equity loans, those are recourse loans, which means that if you don't pay it, they can take your property, plus they can, make you pay every last cent. And so that's why you should be very careful about taking a second mortgage, because the consequences of not paying it are really much more severe than the first. But they found themselves in some kind of bondage, and they should not have been. But it isn't their fault. In America, when people get into deep debt, many, many times, it's their own fault. But in this case, it isn't their fault. Because whose fault is it? It's God's fault, because God sent Nehemiah to Jerusalem to build the walls, and the situation occurred where the people are coming against it, and they're working for God, and they're putting that work first, and as a result, they're borrowing money to eat because they're not able to work their farm. I think this is probably a situation which calls for complaint. What do you think? Complain about to Nehemiah, complain about to God, complain about to the creditors. And there were those who said, we're having to borrow money on our fields and vineyards to pay the king's taxes. How many of you like to pay your taxes? You enjoy that? When you think about it. Okay, you earn a living and you pay somewhere between 15 and 35% for federal, and then you pay like somewhere around, isn't it like 8 or 9% for state? Something like that. And then you pay 7.5% on everything you buy. And then you pay to drive on the road, the throughway, and you pay for your driver's license and your inspection, and you have to pay for insurance, and you have to, everything you do is taxed.
Forget about property in school.
I didn't forget about it. I just wasn't done. Where does the money go? If I earn $20 And then I buy something from Caleb and he makes $20 on it. And I'm paying my percentage, then he pays his percentage, then he spends the money and somebody else makes the money and they have to pay their percentage. Really, when you look at it that way, the government owns all the money. It's only what we can keep in the meantime. And the problem is maybe that it isn't being spent properly. I don't know, I'm not sure, but I think there might be some waste in the system somewhere. And these people are saying, they're gonna foreclose on my property and then I'll have nothing. You know, it used to be, if you didn't pay your property taxes, I think after a year, the government would sell the interest in the money to somebody. So somebody would come along and say, I'll pay the property taxes. And then after a year, if the people don't pay the person that paid the taxes, then they can foreclose and take the property. But the way it is now, there was a famous case right here in Hopewell a few years ago where somebody owed $20,000 in property taxes on their business, and the county took the property and they sold it at auction for $160,000 or something like that. I don't know what the exact figures are. And they made a profit of $140,000 on the property at the expense of the property owner. Pardon me?
And kept it till it went to court.
Yeah, it was litigated. That's theft. The government does some good things. But when it takes people's property who are struggling to do the will of God, then it becomes a problem. They were complaining about it. Now, who is responsible for collecting the king's tax here? Is it not Nehemiah the governor? So this is a complaint against him personally in his role of governor. So there's people that are hungry, there are people that are losing their property, there are people that can't pay for their property taxes because there's a governor there, and then so what do we do? That's not the worst of it. Now the group speaks. Our flesh is the same as that of our kindred. Our children are the same as their children, and yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have been ravaged, and we are powerless, and our fields and vineyards belong to others. Now, when it says slaves, that's not the definition of American slavery. American slavery was where somebody owned another human being, which of course is one of the worst sins of all. But what they would do, when they didn't have any money, they would take their son or their daughter and they would sell their son or daughter into indentured servitude. And that would mean they owed X number of dollars. Their child would have to go and work for somebody else until the debt was paid. Does that sound like a good idea? That's how they did it. And some of the girls went to people's houses to work to pay off these taxes and to pay off the money that they're borrowing for food, were raped. Is that good for good situation to be getting a people together to build a wall to do God's plan? So we have here a problem, but it's an interior problem in this case. It's the rich people, the rich Jews who have lent the money to the poor Jews and have taken their property. Now, during the Depression, there was a man who I won't name over in Bloomfield, and he had lent money on houses all over in Canandaigua and Victor, West Bloomfield, as far as Hopewell. He was very good with money. He lent money, and when when all the people lost their jobs in the Depression, he foreclosed on all of it. And by the time I was cognizant enough to know what was going on, by the 1970 or so, his son was selling these properties off. And they were taken away from people who had nothing. Ooh, that had to hurt. But nobody will notice maybe, and she won't scream. Hi. Yeah, she's good. So when it says slaves, it means indentured servants. There was no such thing as one person owning another person in Judaism ever. In the scriptures, when it talks about slavery, it's not talking about American type slavery. It's not talking about the perversion of it where people use the Bible to own another human being. And I was very angry when I heard their outcry. Now here is the first we see of Nehemiah's anger. And I'll tell you what, this guy was not perfect. He had an anger problem. You know anybody with an anger problem? He had an anger problem. And even though, I mean, the first part of this book is written in the first person, where he says, "Yeah, I did this. We did that." Later on in the book, there's a narrator that tells about what Nehemiah did. And you have to understand that leaders of any kind are not perfect, no matter who they are. And he was livid. We have a slang term we could say here. He was really upset with the situation. Now, was he upset because they were criticizing the tax? Was he upset that the people had borrowed money? No, he was upset with the moneylenders. He was upset with the people that had caused this to be the situation. The people said, their sons and our sons are of the same flesh. We're brothers, we're kin. And they're taking advantage of us. And after thinking it over, I brought charges against the nobles and officials, and I said to them, "You're all taking interest from your own people." And folks, we live in a society where it's normal to go in debt for 30 years to buy a piece of property. Please, don't do that. Do the 15-year deal. Buy a little bit less than what you can afford. I was a real estate agent, and the real estate agent's job is to get the biggest commission that person can get. And so to sell a property that is worth more money is 6%, in the commission, or in the case of land, 8 or 10%. So they try to get you to go with a 30-year. But for just a little bit more, you can go with a 15 and cut off 15 years of payments. So do the math. How much does it cost to do it for 30 years, and how much is it per month, and how much does it cost per month to do it for 15? And when you look at the difference, you see that you're signing away 15 years of your life for nothing to creditors. Not a good idea. So what's he going to do? What's the problem here? The problem is that they're taking interest. Here's the law. If you lend money, this is Exodus, to my people, God's people, the poor among you, you shall not deal with them as a creditor. You shall not exact interest. In Leviticus, do not take interest in advance or otherwise make a profit for them. For the fear of your God, let them live with you. Now, here's the way people would think. Well, you're not supposed to take interest, and so here's what we'll do. I'll lend you $100,000. You sign a note for $100,000, and I'll give you $90,000, and then you pay off the. You know what that's called? Points. When you go to, well, how much is my interest rate going to be? Well, do you want to pay 1, 2, or 3 points? Percentage. It's prepaid interest. It was against the law for them to do that. Now, the idea would be, well, I'll figure this out, the way to get my interest. But God says, no, straight interest, no, points, no. You shall not charge. You shall give the poor people that need your help interest-free money. It's in the law of Moses. The next slide is similar, a couple more laws. I couldn't resist doing that. You shall not lend them your money at interest, take in advance, or provide them food for a profit. Okay, I need a bag of rice. Okay, well, you have to pay me back next year a bag of rice plus 20%. 20% more. That was not allowed. You shall not charge interest on loans to another Israelite, interest on money, interest on provisions, or interest on anything that is lent. This is Moses. And so they had disregarded the ancient, this was ancient by their time. We're talking the time of Nehemiah, like 400 BC and Moses 2000 BC. These are things that throughout their generations, they knew what the law was, but there were people that were more willing to be greedy at the expense of the poor. And Nehemiah wasn't having it. And I called a great assembly to deal with them. And I said, as far as we were able, we brought back our Jewish kindred who've been sold to other nations. He's listing his past record as far as he's been able with his resources and with the resources that he was given by the king of Persia. He's taken that money and he's bought the indentured servants out of slavery and brought them back. That's what he did as a leader. And then he said, and you are selling them back. It's a good idea he prayed about this before he said it, because if you plain get right in the face of somebody and say, what you're doing is not right, you know what happens? They leave the church and go somewhere else. If you really tell them the truth where they're on the wrong path. But he was respected, and it says they couldn't say a word because they knew they were dead wrong in doing that. They were actually hindering the work of God from inside, and they were getting rich at the expense of the poor. I think that might be a liberal criticism of the United States. As much as you don't like the liberals, or you may not, but that's their criticism. The poor are getting poorer, the rich are getting richer. And there's some truth to that. So I said, the thing you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of God and prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? This is a question no matter what moral issue we're talking about. We, as people of God, are responsible to give a good testimony to the community around us. And people should see us not as bloodsuckers. What's the number one criticism of the church? All they want is your money. And you know why that criticism is valid? Because there are certain people that are living in multi-million-dollar homes and flying around the world in jets. It's a valid criticism. What's the second one behind that? Maybe the first one is the second one, I don't know. They're hypocrites. Is there something hypocritical about these people taking the money? They're all working together to build the wall of the city of Jerusalem, and the rich people are taking the money from the poor people. Is there something hypocritical about that? Now, as I said, we'll see in a week or two the hypocrisy of Mr. Nehemiah himself, because he's an angry guy. And they just pushed him too far at some point, but not here. So I'm doing it on time. Hey, I'm doing all right. Then he says, moreover, my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us stop taking the interest. Now, he was not taking the interest, but his family and his brothers, and we have to assume the treasury of the king of Persia, who this whole operation was underneath, from the king's tax, they were giving the money to the people without interest. But they didn't have enough money for everybody. And so in the case of that, they were borrowing from these other people. Restore to them this day 8 things: their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, their houses, the interest on the money, grain, wine, and oil. Give them every penny back. Give them every piece of property back. Give them every bit of food back that you've taken, and we can start from zero. Well, suppose you were one of these people that has all the money. Would you like it? No, probably not. But you know what? They said, we will restore everything, demand nothing. We will do as you say. And I called the priest to make them take an oath to do as they had promised. So the priest comes in, raise your right hand and swear that you'll do the right thing. Now, you hear people today say, oh, I swear to God. Thus and so, oh, I just swear to God. They don't swear to God. They have no. Jesus said don't swear at all. But they think that if they just say, I swear to God, that you'll believe, and I'll swear on my mother's grave. Now, when you swear to God, you better fulfill it. If you bring the kid up front and have the kid dedicated to the Lord, and you agree to raise that child as a Christian kid, God takes that very seriously. When they came into the promised land, they came towards Jericho, and Joshua brought them forth and said, are you going to do everything that God tells you to do? And they swore an oath. They said, everything the Lord says, we will do it. And so he made them swear. And then afterwards, he took his, they didn't have pockets, It says in the Bible somewhere that a man should not wear women's clothing and a woman should not wear man's clothing. Well, what's the difference? They all wore tunics. Only different color. But they didn't have pockets on the side. They had a fold. And so he takes the fold and he shakes the dust and the 3 coins and the little piece of Kleenex out and says, may the Lord do to you if you don't perform this. May you actually become the hungry, poor person that you previously afflicted. What goes around comes around kind of thing. So that was an interesting thing. So what can we learn? Oh, the assembly alert said amen. They praised the Lord and they did it as they promised. That's cool. It's always cool when people do what they're supposed to. The proverb said, like a swallow in its flying, so a curse without cause is not a light. I never understood this until last year when my neighbor allowed a swallow's nest on his barn. I'd never had an experience with swallows before. You know what I'm talking about? They come and they don't hit you, but they scare you off. And so these people actually swore a curse on themselves if they didn't follow through, if they didn't take care of the people that needed taken care of. And so the curse will not alight if there isn't reason. Okay, summing up. Political decisions have unintended consequences even if God arranges them. That's one of the lessons of this. Number two, sometimes A-list items complete for our time. Do I work my farm or do I build a wall? You know, everything in its own place. Number three, using people is not right. Compare our blessings to ancient Jews. What do you think? Kelly's got the mic. Comments?
Okay. So when I was reading this, verse 9, they didn't fear God, even though they were doing God's work. And they knew what they were doing was, ordained by God. They still did what they wanted to do. And they didn't consider their actions, the rich people didn't consider their actions, how it was impacting their brothers and sisters, or they didn't care. I think, they were used to doing things in the way of their world at that time and saw no difference in doing God's work with the way they did business in the world. That's what caused all of this, slowed down the progress on the wall, probably jeopardized the rebuilding completely, because you can't work when you're starving. And if you don't have anything to go back to, the motivation drops. And you can see where probably a few people really had a huge impact on God's work and his plan for those people. And then, what did it do? I think the other part was, what did that do to the next generation, right? I mean, the parents are dealing with the loss of the land. They're seeing their kids are being sold into slavery, really, indentured servitude. And how did that impact the other children and the younger children and their walk with God to see, it wasn't just anybody doing this, it was other believers.
Of sorts.
Of sorts. Well, like now, they're professing to be. And they're getting to see really where their walk with God is, but you've got to take them at their word until there's no proof of that.
Why are the rich getting richer?
They're charging interest.
And there's two kinds of people in this world, those that pay interest and those that receive it. Gene?
So the rich are getting richer because they forgot the number one commandment. And in the Jewish tradition, they said, the Lord God is one, right? Love the God, Lord God, and Lord God alone. They were loving other things than God. They were actually worshiping and devoting their time to things other than God.
The 10th commandment.
The 10th commandment. The us as professing Christians understand that we're to love him more than, and we don't. In our actions, we don't. When we don't give someone what they need, and we have it, we're not obeying God's will. When we sell somebody something they need, and we could freely give it to them, we're serving ourselves and not them. So I think we got to be careful. We all want to have all this stuff, but we're supposed to want to have God. If God gives us air to breathe freely and food to eat, right? how could we take advantage of someone who needs that and make money on it? Doesn't make sense. Yeah, we're hypocrites.
There has to be a balance somewhere. I mean, taking care of your family is, of course, you know, they have actually neglected that in this story for the sake of the wall. And, but, you know, what's more important, building a protection for yourself or eating well for a while? I mean, you have to figure, they obviously felt that building the wall was more important, or they wouldn't have done it. But you're right, you know, we can't, we have to take care of our own family, but we also, if we have something that we can help others, we need to do that. That's the thou shalt not covet commandment, the last one. Anyone else? Okay, I have something here. Let's do a little bit of a responsive reading. I'll read the first one, you read the bold one, okay? Can you see it? O Lord, who may abide in your tent? Who may dwell on your holy hill? Which of course is Jerusalem. Do not slander with their tongue, and do no evil to their friends, nor take up a reproach against their neighbors. But honor those who fear the Lord, who stand by their oath even to their hurt. And everybody, all those who do these things shall never be moved. May God bless you and have a great day.
You too.